In a bustling city, known for its cosmopolitan population and efficient police force, there was a really strong-willed woman named Olivia Thompson. Olivia Thompson was born and raised in an African-American community that was close-knit. She had always been aware of the problems people of color had to face in everyday life. Since childhood, she had shown an unwavering dedication toward the cause of justice and equality that would later become the foundation of her professional life and character. Her father and mother were both working individuals, inculcating in her the virtues of integrity, hard work, and she was raised by her parents to stand up for what is right no matter how popular the opposing opinion. Olivia did well at school. She had straight A's and could get a scholarship to a very good university. It was during her college years that she realized her calling, the law. She enrolled in law school, determined to make a change. Olivia pursued her legal education with an uncompromising seriousness. She plunged into the study of constitutional law, civil rights, and social justice, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Her professors and peers were impressed with she was a person to impress with a sharp mind, eloquence, and a clear sense of purpose. Olivia, among others, never perceived the law as something abstract but rather was part of her life and part of the community in which she was living. Upon graduation with honors, Olivia plunged headfirst into her career as a defense attorney, accepting clients from every avenue of life. She soon would be known as a fierce and tireless advocate who would never back down from even the most challenging cases, sometimes against overwhelming opponents. Her dedication to her clients and mastery over the use of the legal process earned her respect and admiration of all other legal professionals throughout her career, and the appreciation of those she represented. Olivia's reputation grew and soon reached high levels. Her integrity, intelligence, and commitment to justice made her an ideal candidate for a judicial position. She knew this would be an even greater forum from which she could effect change while upholding those principles dear to her heart. When the opportunity arose, Olivia applied for a seat on the bench. The selection process was rigorous, but Olivia's qualifications and character shone through, and she was appointed judge, one of the few African American women to hold such a position in her jurisdiction. She had sworn to an oath of office and felt a deep sense of responsibility and pride. She knew that her role as judge was not only an achievement she made personally, but also a PR progress and symbol of hope for her community. The moment Judge Olivia Thompson slipped on her judicial robes, she became an instant courtroom force to be reckoned with, where her verdicts were not only just but also based upon the principles of blindfold justice and equality. She dealt with every defendant who appeared before her, irrespective of their background or case. Her courtroom became a beacon of hope to those seeking justice, and her reputation as a fair but compassionate judge spread far and wide in no time. On her rise to success, Judge Thompson never forgot her origins and the setbacks her community was yet to face. She was using her position in order to be able to fight for reform and to combat systemic inequalities in the system of law. She spoke loudly, her voice, against racial profiling and police brutality, and the racially disproportionate incarceration rate has become an effective tool in urging others to follow her lead in the fight for justice. One evening, seated in her chambers, reflecting on the journey that had brought her thus far and the many challenges yet ahead, Judge Olivia Thompson felt a new sense of resolve. She knew well that her job was far from over, but neither was the road to absolute equality very long and tedious. Yet, she also knew that she had the strength, the knowledge base, and the diligently, with a resolute heart and an unwavering commitment to justice, with readiness for whatever lay ahead in battles yet to come. Little did she know such a routine traffic stop would put her convictions to the ultimate test and make her center stage in a manner she had never expected. But now Judge Olivia Thompson focused on the present as she prepared to dispense justice and uphold the law in what was just another case among many others. On a chilly autumn evening, Judge Olivia Thompson behind the wheels of her car, driving down the busy streets of the city after a very, very long day in court proved to be trying. She finally had the weight of her judicial robes lifted, but the responsibility of her position was never truly off her shoulders. Driving, her mind set on those cases she had presided over today, touching lives and dispensing justice to the best way she could interpret the law, Olivia barely registered the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. It took her an extra second longer to realize there was a police officer signaling her to pull over. Sighing for her to pull over, she carefully veered her car onto the side of the road, wondering what could have provoked the traffic stop. She ran her mind over her driving in the last few minutes, knowing she had done nothing in violation of the traffic rules. Taking a deep breath while waiting for the officer to approach, she reminded herself to be calm and cool. She had encountered her fair share of law enforcement officers in her line of work. She knew that even in cases of routine interactions, things could turn ugly when not treated with care and caution. The officer, a middle-aged white man, with a stern expression, approached Olivia's car. With a purposeful stride, he tapped on her window, and she promptly rolled it down, greeting him with a polite smile. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. The officer's demeanor, however, was far from cordial. He looked at Olivia with a mixture of suspicion and disdain, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her face and the interior of her car. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone harsh and abrupt. Olivia complied, handing over her documents. With a sense of unease, she had experienced her share of prejudice and discrimination throughout her life, but the officer's hostile attitude caught her off guard. As he scrutinized her license, she wondered what could have prompted such a reaction. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Olivia shook her head, maintaining her composure despite the officer's aggressive tone. "No, officer, I do not. I believe I was driving in accordance with the traffic laws." The officer scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. "You people always think you're above the law, don't you? Driving around in your fancy cars, thinking you can get away with anything." Olivia felt a surge of anger at the officer's blatant racism, but she quickly teared it down, knowing that reacting with emotion would only escalate the situation. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "Officer, I assure you that I have not violated any traffic laws. If you could please clarify the reason for this stop, I would appreciate it." The officer's face hardened, and he leaned into the window with his voice low, menacingly. "I don't need to clarify anything to you. You people are always up to no good, and it is my job to keep the streets clean from the likes of you." Olivia's heart was racing as she realized this wasn't just a routine traffic stop. She was about to come face to face with the ugly face of racism and abuse of power. The officers weren't stung, but she refused to let them shake her resolve. She knew she was going to have to be extremely cautious in handling this situation, not only because she took a moment to compose herself for protection, but also for the greater good of justice. After having collected her thoughts, Olivia looked right into the face of the officer. "Officer, I know you have an obligation to uphold the law, but I can assure you I have done nothing wrong," she said in this firm voice that didn't even quiver. "I am a law-abiding citizen and a respected member of this community. Now, I ask you to give me the respect and professionalism due any other individual." The officer's face screwed up in anger as he leaned over and laid his hand on the handle of Olivia's car door, opened. At this moment, Olivia knew she had to act instant wit and a firm decision. She would stand up for her rights, her dignity, not just for herself, but for all those victimized by the very system intended for protection. Olivia inhaled a deep breath once and steeled herself with the strength of her conviction and the weight of position for the expected confrontation. Not that she felt her next few moments were going to be critical in regard to her safety, but more than that, in the broader perspective in the struggle against injustice. Ahead, as the officer's hand laid grasp of the handle of Olivia's car door, a surging in the veins from the adrenaline coursing through her being warned her that the next few instants were going to be critical in how this standoff would eventually come to an end. In a calm, clear voice, she said, "Officer, I advise you to step away from my vehicle. You have no legal right to open my door without my consent or probable cause." The officer's face contorted into a sneer as his eyes flashed with anger. "I don't take orders from people like you," he snarled, spitting out the words. Dripping with contempt. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you can tell me how to do my job?" Olivia remained composed, her voice steady and unwavering. "Officer, I am not trying to tell you how to do your job. I am simply asserting my rights. As a citizen, I have complied with your request for my license and registration, and I have answered your questions truthfully. If you have a valid reason for detaining me further, please take it now. Otherwise, I respectfully request that you allow me to leave the officer's grip as the door handle tightened, and for a moment Olivia feared that he would forcibly open the door. But instead, he leaned in closer to the window, his face mere inches from hers. "You people always think you're entitled to special treatment," he growled. "You drive around in your fancy cars, living in your fancy homes, thinking you're better than the rest of us. Well, let me tell you something, Missy. Out here on these streets, I'm the one in charge, and I don't care who you think you are." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine from the officer's words, but she refused to show her fear. She had faced discrimination and prejudice before, but never had she encountered such blatant racism from a law enforcement officer. She knew she had to stand her ground not only for herself, but for all those who had been victimized by the very people sworn to protect them. Olivia took a deep breath, looked right into the eye of this officer, her gaze unremitting, and said, "Officer, your words and actions are not only unprofessional, but also highly offensive. I have done nothing wrong, nothing to warrant this treatment, and I will not tolerate being spoken to in such a manner. I ask again, do you have a valid reason for detaining me, or am I free to go?" The officer's face reneged with rage, and for a moment Olivia thought he might lash out physically, but instead, he stepped back from the car, his hand moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "You're not going anywhere until I say so," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I have the authority to detain you for as long as I see fit, and there's nothing you can do about it." Olivia's heart braced, but refused to back down. She knew the officer's actions were a blatant abuse of authority, and she wouldn't be bullied. She spoke in a calm, even tone. "Officer, I understand that you are within your rights to detain anyone when probable cause is established, but I have given you no probable cause to suspect me of anything. If you continue detaining me without cause, I will be left with no option but to file a formal complaint against you in your department." The officer's face widened at Olivia's words, and for a moment she saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face, but just as quickly his expression hardened, and he leaned in close once more. "You think you can threaten me?" he hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I can make your life a living hell, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it." Olivia felt a surge of anger at the officer's blatant abuse of power, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. She knew that she had to remain calm and level-headed if she was going to navigate this situation successfully. With a steadying breath, she reached for her purse, her movements slow and deliberate. The officer's hand twitched towards his weapon, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice tight with tension. Olivia looked up at him, her expression calm and resolute. "I am reaching for my identification," she said, her words measured and precise. "I think it's time for you to know exactly who you are dealing with, officer." With that, she pulled out her judicial identification card, holding it up for the officer to witness, as his eyes widened in shock and recognition. Olivia knew the tide had turned in her favor, but this was far from over, and she steeled herself for the confrontation shortly to come. Olivia held up her judicial identification card, whereupon the officer's eyes went wide with incredulity. He stared at the card, agape, as the full realization of who had been confronting slowly made its way into his brain. The tension between them seemed to sizzle in the air, as palpably the power dynamic shifted. "Judge Olivia Thompson," the officer muttered, barely above a whisper, I didn't realize Olivia fixed him with a steely gaze, her voice calm but firm. Officer, I have identified myself as a member of the judiciary. I am well aware of my rights and the limits of your authority. Now, I asked you again, do you have a valid reason for detaining me, or am I free to go? The officer's face paled, and he took a step back from the car, his hand dropping from his weapon. I apologize, Your Honor, he stammered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just doing my job. Olivia's narrowed, and she, Officer, today you have acted so out of the realm of your responsibilities. You spoke in a low, intense voice. You have racially profiled, doctored wild accusations, and abused authority. This is not the way a law enforcement officer should behave. The officer slumped his shoulders, looking down to the ground, unable to meet Olivia's gaze. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I don't know what came over me. It won't happen again. Olivia shook her head, her expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. Officer, an apology is not enough. Your actions today are indicative of a greater problem in our law enforcement system. Racial profiling and abuse of power have no place in a just society, much less among those sworn to uphold the law. The officer fidgeted uncomfortably, completely deflated from his earlier defiance. I know, Your Honor. I'll turn myself in to my superior. Superiors? I'll accept whatever consequences they see fit. Olivia's gaze softened slightly, her voice even firmer. I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility for your actions, officer. But this incident cannot just be swept under the rug. I will file a formal complaint with your department, and I do expect one full investigation into your conduct. And finally, I am going to be asking for systemic changes regarding larger issues of racial bias and misconduct within law enforcement. The officer nodded, his face a mix of shame and resignation. I understand, Your Honor. Independent Illinois cooperate fully with whatever investigation. I know I was wrong, and I am ready to face the consequences. Olivia took a deep breath. Her will unshaken. I do hope this incident would prove to be an eye-opener, officer. We must not let racism and abuse of authority run amok, most particularly from those sworn to serve and protect. That, too, is the call of duty upon us as officers of the law and as citizens to stand up against injustice wherever we see it. He nodded slowly. All arrogance was gone now. You are right, Your Honor. I have lots of thinking to do. I promise I will do better, and I will work to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Olivia's face, I will just say that moral dynamic was softened a bit, and she nodded in acknowledgement. I really do believe people can change, officer. The slight softening of voice now laced with a sternness, but change requires more than just words. It requires action, accountability, and a legitimate commitment to right action, and I hope that you take this opportunity to grow into a better officer and better person. With that, Olivia returned her judicial badge to her purse and looked at him expectantly. Now, unless there's anything else, I think we're done here. The officer nodded, stepping back from the car and gesturing for Olivia to pass. You can go. Your H-, and thank you. Thanks for holding me accountable, and for giving me the opportunity to make things right. Olivia nodded, a shadow of a smile dancing at the edges of her lips. That's all any of us can ask for, officer. A chance to do better, to be better. Let's not squander it. With that, she rolled up her window and pulled away from the curb, her mind already racing to consider all the steps she would have to take to handle this incident and what it represented. It was going to be a very long and exhaustive road that lay ahead, but Olivia knew she was ready to meet it head-on for justice, for her community, and for a better future toward which to strive. With the sight of the confrontation disappearing into the distance, Olivia's mind whirred with thoughts and emotions as she drove away. She had experienced racism and prejudice earlier, but never so brazenly from a man committed to uphold the law. Shaken, The experience had driven her resolve even firmer to fight for justice and equality were pulling onto the parking lot of her office. Olivia took a minute to breathe in deeply, letting the heavy beating of her heart subside. She knew this incident with the officer was just the tip of the iceberg, a symptom of something greater playing out in the criminal justice system. She also knew she had the power, the platform, and the place to make that change. Olivia marched into her office, leaving all curious glances from her co-workers in a void. She shut the door behind her and sat at her desk. Her mind had already begun working out a course of action, and while she did this with the officer, by virtue of her position, she had to bring it out into the open concerning the more generalized issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. She picked up her phone and dialed the police commissioner's number, with whom she had worked on several occasions. When he answered, she didn't mince words. "Commissioner, this is Judge Olivia Thompson. I need to speak to you about an incident that occurred earlier today." Commissioner listened keenly while Olivia recounted what she experienced at the hands of the officer. With every passing second, his voice conveyed more worry, with the racist remarks and abuse of power connotations by the officer. The commissioner didn't say a word for some time at the end, his shock still evident over the phone line. "Judge Thompson, I am really bothered with what you've told me," he said finally. His heavy voice came laced with emotion. "Let me, first of all, assure you that this kind of behavior is certainly not tolerated and is not acceptable. On a personal note, within our department, I will oversee an investigation of the conduct of this officer, and I assure you that the proper disciplinary action will be taken." Olivia nodded. She sounded firm and resolute in tenor. "Thank you, Commissioner, for your commitment to finding a resolution on this matter. I must impress upon you that it is not an aberration. Racial profiling and police misconduct are systemic issues that do call for systemic solutions. We need to take a hard look at the way in which our law enforcement agencies currently function and institute real changes in a manner that treats all citizens with fairness and respect." For a moment, the commissioner said nothing, and Olivia could feel the weight of her words sink in. "You're right, Judge Thompson," he said finally, after what felt like an eternity. His voice was equally weighted with the responsibility of it all. "We do have much work ahead to rebuild lost trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve. I pledge to work with you and other leaders within the community to create and implement effective reforms, one that truly addresses these problems." Olivia felt a wave of hope but deep within her heart, she knew that the road ahead would be long and expensive. "Commissioner," she said to him with much appreciation in her voice, "I look forward to working with you for a more just and equitable criminal justice system. But at the same time, I know very well that change cannot be effected behind closed doors. We need to cast these issues into the light and involve the community in the process of reform." The commissioner agreed, and the two spent the next several minutes discussing potential strategies for raising awareness and involving the change in the community. In a sudden turn, Olivia had one get up and over desk to walk to the window, overseeing the city below. She knew the fight for justice and equality would not go so easy, but she also knew it was one worth fighting. She took one deep breath and turned back to her desk, beginning to draft a statement to the press about her experience with the officer and her commitment to addressing the greater issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. As she typed, Olivia felt a sense of power and purpose wash over her that she had never before experienced. She now knew that she was in a position to effect real change upon fellow citizens, and she was resolute in her use of both her position and platform toward just that end. For the first time in her career, she felt alive, connected with her work for the cause of justice that had always been her guiding light. One final keystroke, Olivia finished her statement, leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. She knew the road ahead would be long and tortuous, But she also knew she wasn't going to be troubled because she was ready to face it headlong for her people, justice, and the better future of all. Days went by, and this event of Olivia with the police officer started to be highlighted in the entire nation. This story, where an alleged African-American judge was facing blunt racism and abuse of authority by a law enforcement officer, aroused outrage and a call for change from communities. From coast to coast, as media descended upon the city, Olivia found herself at the center of a maelstrom of attention, reporters clamoring for interviews, and community leaders and activists seeking her out for guidance and support. Though overwhelming at times, Olivia knew such attention provided an opportunity to shed light on those systemic issues of racial profiling and police misconduct that had so long plagued the criminal justice system. With calm and poise, Olivia used her platform, speaking to her experience and the greater ills involved. She gave interviews to national media outlets, participated in community forums and rallies, and she met with local and state officials to discuss ways of effecting reform. As the community rallied behind her, Olivia was heartened by this outpouring of support and solidarity. People from all walks of life, from all racial and ethnic backgrounds, came forward to demand change and accountability from law enforcement. There were marches, protests in the streets. Community leaders and activists worked around the clock to make sure the movement would not dissipate. But Olivia knew this was never about one incident or a single police officer. It was about the system that had been broken for so long, a system that had brought on racism and inequality for decades. She knew real change would have to be bolstered by each aspect of society: law enforcement, the courts, the greater community. As the investigation into the officer's conduct proceeded, Olivia worked closely with the police commissioner and others. She advocated for officials to create a roadmap for reform by pushing for more training and accountability for police and more openness and oversight when it came to handling complaints of wrongdoing. It soon dawned on Olivia that true reform could not be effected in a vacuum. She, therefore, extended an olive branch to community leaders and agencies, requesting input from them and partnership in the reform process. With all of this, she worked to build bridges between law enforcement and their communities served, knowing that trust and understanding were required if true progress was to be made. As weeks turned into months, Olivia's efforts began to bear fruit. The officer who had confronted her was found guilty of misconduct and dismissed from the force. A powerful message that racism and abuse of power would not be tolerated. New training programs and accountability measures were instituted inside the police department, and a community oversight board was set up to offer more transparency and provide input from the public. But Olivia knew the work was far from this is going to take long. She added over the systemic issues of racism and inequality that had long plagued the criminal justice system. But she was determined to keep fighting, to keep pushing for change and progress, no matter how long it took. Seated one evening in her office reflecting on events of the past few months, Olivia felt a sense of pride and purpose that she had never known before. She had always been committed to justice and equality. But now, she felt truly now, for the first time in her life, linked to the fight. She gazed out at the silhouette of the city. Olivia knew full well that the way forward would be long and laborious. Still, she knew that she did not walk alone. The support of her community, the commitment of her co-workers, and strength in her convictions assured her that change was within reach. So, taking a deep breath and with renewed determination, Olivia turned back to work, prepared for whatever lay ahead. For she knew the fight for justice and equality was not only it was her battle, but all who stood and fought for a world much fairer and saner, and she was ready to go on the battlefield one step at a time. With the investigation into the conduct of the officer pending, Olivia took her rightful place with immediate effect at the center of that complex, emotive process. The Internal Affairs section of the police department launched an investigation into the incident, including interviews with witnesses, reviews of body camera footage, and analysis of the officer's record of service. Olivia cooperated fully with the investigation and provided an in-depth account of her encounter with the officer and events leading up to it. She knew her testimony would be pivotal in how the case went, and she was resolved to see that justice was served. Evidence that emerged during the investigation may have led some to question whether disturbing past behavior by the officer had been left unchecked. Other incidents included racial profiling and excessive use of force. All these showed a pattern of misconduct that went back for a period of time that was too long. Olivia watched as the case against the officer grew stronger day in and day out. Witnesses popped out to corroborate her account of the incident, and the body cam videos simply produced the smoking gun against the officer in terms of his racist remarks and abuse of authority. As it seemed that a case was building against the officer, Olivia knew that the road to justice would not go through easy lanes. The police union had rallied behind the officer with his legal representation and public support. Some even went so far as to say that Olivia was playing the race card in an attempt to smear the police. All such attacks did little to deter Olivia, who was quite aware that one person would never win that struggle. She continued to speak about what happened to her and larger issues involved even as the backlash strengthened in intensity against her. As the investigation was winding down, Olivia was on pins and needles. She knew the result of the case would extend far beyond the criminal trial verdict for Jackie and for the accused rapists, but to her own life as well, and to the community as a whole. Guilty and duly disciplined, it would go to send a huge message that racism and abuse of authority were unacceptable within the police force. If he was let off scot-free, it would have only reinforced this cynicism and distrust fostered by the police-community relationship. At last, after weeks of hectic investigation, the verdict came out. The officer was found guilty of misconduct and summarily dismissed. The decision was welcomed by Olivia and her supporters with feelings of relief and vindication, another important step toward justice and accountability. Yet, even as they celebrated this victory, Olivia knew the work was far from over. During the course of the investigation, the deeper issues in the police department had come out, systemic problems that would take a lot of time, effort, and commitment to change. She knew she had to press on by continuing to strive forward with reform and change through collaboration with community leaders and the law. The weeks and months that followed are filled with the work of enforcement officials building a more just and equitable system for one and all. Throwing herself with redoubled energy and determination into this work, Olivia met first with the police commissioner and other high-ranking officials to discuss how best to achieve greater accountability in the training and community relations within the department. She also collaborated with community organizations and advocacy groups on developing grassroots initiatives to build trust between law enforcement and the public. Through it all, Olivia remained a voice of calm and reason's steadfast advocate for justice and equality in the face of even the most daunting challenges. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that change was possible if only they had the courage and commitment to see it through. In reflection on the events of the last few months, Olivia felt a sense of pride and purpose unlike any she had ever known. She had always been committed to justice and equality, but now she felt truly more connected with the struggle than ever before. And as she looked to the future, she knew she would continue to fight for what was right no matter the cost for her community, for justice, and for a better world for all. As the dust began to settle on the investigation into the officer's misconduct, Olivia found herself squarely at the center of a new conversation about the future of policing in her community. The incident had laid bare deep-seated issues within the department. There was a feeling that something needed to be different to rebuild that trust and make people accountable. Olivia had been at the right place in time to effect great impact for change as a respected member of the bench, but vocal to fight for justice and equality. She had both credence and the podium from which serious, substantive reforms could be effected. Rejuvenated with her sense of purpose, she did just that in the ensuing weeks and months. Olivia worked tirelessly to build coalitions and forge partnerships with community leaders, advocacy groups, and law enforcement officials to convene meetings and forums where challenges facing the Department would be discussed and solutions brainstormed. She had to advocate on the local and state level for legislation that promoted greater police transparency and accountability. Yet even as she did so, Olivia knew that real change would require more than policy reforms. Real change would demand a sea change in culture and mindset on the part of the department, one that would involve an ability and a will to confront hard truths and to engage in honest, sometimes uncomfortable conversations about racial bias and power. To that end, Olivia worked with the police commissioner to institute an all-around, rigorous training for officers, one that emphasized de-escalation, cultural competency, and community policing. She helped institute a civilian oversight review board, a non-aligned entity tasked with the review of complaints against officers, recommending needed disciplinary action in some cases. Olivia also sought to diversify and bring more inclusiveness into the department by recommending that recruitment and promotion of officers coming from underrepresented communities to top jobs. Through it all, Olivia stood with the community, attending neighborhood meetings, listening to the concerns and experiences of the residents, working to bridge gaps between law enforcement and those they served. She knew trust and understanding were essential for any real progress to be made, and she was determined to do her part in fostering both. Slowly but surely, Olivia began to see the fruits of her labors. The department instituted new policies and procedures. The way officers engaged the community was drastically changing, aimed at increasing accountability and transparency. Complaints against officers went down, while surveys showed an increased sense of trust and confidence in the department by residents. Still, Olivia knew this was far from over. Systemic issues entrenched themselves deep, and these particular ones leading all the way to the incident with this officer would take lots of sustained work and commitment to totally root out. There were setbacks and challenges along the way. She had been a first-hand witness to how strong the power of community was, drawing strength from the uniting of people who wanted change and a better future. She was not deterred, though, by those feelings of frustration and self-doubt. She knew quite well that such moments pass and that, with perseverance, determination, real progress was possible. So, on one evening in her office, mulling over the journey up to this point, Olivia felt hopeful and optimistic about things she hadn't felt in a very long period of time. She knew it would be a long and hard road ahead, but she also knew that wasn't all. With the community's support, with the dedication of her colleagues, and by the strength of her own conviction, anything could be possible. She looked out at the city skyline and smiled to herself, thinking of all the work that lay ahead. There would be more late nights and tough conversations, more battles to be fought and won. But she was ready for it all, ready to keep pushing forward, to keep fighting for justice and equality for as long as it took. For Olivia knew this was more than a job, or a cause. It was, so termed correctly put, a true passion to make a difference in the world. With that realization, she could be assured of having direction and commitment to see her through whatever obstacle lay ahead. She was ready now, with the will to take the lead as their voice, speaking for the voiceless and standing up for the downtrodden, although she knew it fully well that together they could make a better world, one that is just for all. As the months slowly turned into years, her unrelenting drive to reform the police force and build a fair and equal community began to bear some fruit. The changes she had so vehemently fought for, new policies, procedures, training programs, and oversight boards, were taking root and capturing hold, slowly but surely, in deeply changing the culture and practices of law enforcement in the city. Still, Olivia knew that there was never really an end to the work. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference in the life of someone around her. She continued to press on to advocate for change, and by leading from example, even when the road ahead seemed so long and the obstacles insurmountable. Through it all, Olivia found the strength of people around her, from the community leaders and activists who stood beside her in this fight for justice, from dedicated officers working tirelessly to serve and protect their city, and from the many ordinary citizens who believe in the power of change and the promise of a better tomorrow. She saw the strength of the people in adversity, the courage, and the determination for what was right. She knew together they could achieve anything they'd put their minds to past. The story of Olivia became an epitome of hope and inspiration for everybody across the nation. Steadfast devotion to justice and equality, firm determination against insurmountable odds, had touched innumerable lives of people and communities, kindling a movement across far beyond the borders of her city. She had been invited to conferences and events all over the country where Olivia would tell her experiences and perceptions to help others who had their own through the struggles for change. She became a role model and mentor for a new generation of youthful leadership, both male and female, who looked to her as a shining example of what could be accomplished if one were but brave enough and sure enough about where one was going. Through it all, Olivia had the humility to remain well-grounded by the ordinary truths which had set her on the path she had walked so far. She knew that change was never easy, that progress was more often laborious and painful, but also knew it was a battle worth fighting for. At each unremarkable triumph, at each step forward, brought them closer to the world that they have dreamt of building. She reflected on the road that took her from a young girl who witnessed her parents struggle for discrimination and injustice to the respected judge and community leader she had become. Olivia was filled with a pride that brimmed over her heart and a sense of purpose. She knew she had been blessed with an opportunity few could dream of, to be in a position to make a difference in the world, to use her talents and her position to fight for values dear to her, and she knew she would do so for as long as she had breath in her body. The fight for justice and equality was more for Olivia than a calling or career. It was the way of life, a sacred duty entrusted to her. And she would not rest until that duty was fulfilled, until every person, regardless of race or background, could live in a world of true freedom and opportunity. As she sat in her office looking out at the city she loves, Olivia felt a sense of hope and determination that she knew would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The road ahead was going to be long and strenuous, setbacks many, barriers one after another. Yet she was also aware of not being alone. She was part of something greater than herself, a movement reaching far beyond her circle to make a change in this world. And with that understanding, she derived an inner strength and some sense of purpose to lead her forward, step by step. So she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and turned back to her work, ready for whatever new challenge may come her way, because together they could bring a better, just a better world for all. And that was a fight worth fighting, no matter how long it took.